Welcome Whispers After Midnight. Tonight's story takes us deep into Natchez, Mississippi, 1858, a place of whispered fears, watchful eyes, and a plantation system built to crush hope. What you're about to hear sounds impossible, yet it comes from fragments of real historical accounts and oral tradition. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if stories like this matter to you, please subscribe, because uncovering, cross-checking, and carefully piecing together true historical data like this takes an incredible amount of time and effort, and your support keeps these forgotten stories alive. In 1858, Natchez stood as one of the wealthiest slaveholding regions in the American South. Towering mansions overlooked the Mississippi River, their elegance built entirely on forced labor. Cotton was king, and plantations operated like tightly controlled machines, every movement scheduled, every sound familiar, every body accounted for at least in theory. Enslaved people were not seen as individuals but as inventory. Measured by productivity rather than humanity, plantation culture relied heavily on routine. Dawn brought predictable activity, roosters crowing, tools clanking, enslaved workers moving between cabins and fields under the watchful eyes of overseers. This repetition created a dangerous illusion of control. Anything that fit into the expected rhythm of plantation life was often ignored. A child carrying a rooster at sunrise appeared normal, almost invisible, because it belonged to the soundscape and imagery of daily labor. Children, especially young enslaved boys, occupied a shadowed place within this system. Too small to be viewed as a threat, too young to be carefully monitored, they were often sent on minor errands around the plantation. This lack of scrutiny, born from cruelty and arrogance, unintentionally created gaps that a desperate and observant child could exploit. Natchez plantations were also surrounded by natural barriers, dense woods, swamps, riverbanks, and winding dirt paths. While these landscapes trapped many, they also offered escape routes to those who understood timing and deception. By 1858, fear of escape was constant, yet plantation owners trusted familiarity over vigilance. They believed control came from ownership, not awareness. This culture, rigid, repetitive, and blinded by its own confidence, set the stage for one of the most unlikely escapes. The boy did not fight the system head-on. He moved within it, using its assumptions, sounds, and routines against itself. In Natchez, 1858, the greatest weakness of plantation culture was not lack of force, but lack of imagination. On plantations in 1858, control was not maintained by chains alone, it was enforced through routine. Every hour of the day was structured, repeated, and expected to unfold the same way, day after day. This repetition was deliberate. Plantation owners and overseers believed that predictability crushed resistance. When life followed a fixed rhythm, there was supposedly no room for planning, no space for rebellion, and no time for escape. Dawn was the most important moment of this system. The day began before sunlight, marked by familiar sounds: roosters crowing, doors creaking open, footsteps on packed dirt, tools being lifted. These noises were not questioned because they happened every morning. Sound itself became part of surveillance. Anything unusual drew attention, while anything familiar passed unnoticed. Enslaved people were expected to move in visible patterns, from cabins to yards, from yards to fields, from fields back again. Overseers counted groups, not individuals. If the expected flow appeared intact, the system assumed nothing was wrong. This created a dangerous flaw: visibility without recognition. Someone could be seen, yet not truly noticed. Routine also dulled the senses of those enforcing it. Watching the same motions every day bred complacency. Guards learned to look past ordinary activity rather than examine it. a child carrying out a morning task, even one involving an animal, blended seamlessly into the background of plantation life. Familiarity replaced scrutiny. For the enslaved, routines were meant to erase identity and will. But for those who observed carefully, routine could be studied, predicted, and exploited. Knowing when people stopped paying attention was as powerful as knowing where the exits were. The boy's escape worked not because he broke routine, but because he followed it perfectly. He moved at the right hour, made the right noises, and appeared exactly where someone like him was expected to be. In a system obsessed with order, the most effective rebellion was to become indistinguishable from it. On southern plantations in the mid-1800s, enslaved children existed in a cruel in-between state, ever present, yet rarely seen. They were everywhere, running errands, tending animals, carrying water, sweeping yards, but they were not viewed as individuals. To overseers and owners, children were future labor, not immediate threats. This perception made them dangerously invisible. Unlike adults, children were often excluded from strict counting at dawn and dusk. Roll calls focused on field hands, skilled laborers, and anyone considered valuable that day. Children moved freely across plantation spaces under the assumption they belonged wherever they were. Their small size, quiet obedience, and routine tasks allowed them to pass without scrutiny. This invisibility was reinforced by dehumanization. Enslaved children were denied childhood itself, no protection, no education, no recognition of fear or intelligence. Because they were underestimated, their awareness was overlooked. Yet children observed everything: patrol patterns, punishments, safe paths, dangerous zones, and moments when adults stopped paying attention. The boy in this story understood something the system never considered, that his greatest weakness in their eyes was his greatest strength. He was not watched closely. He was not expected to think strategically. He was assumed to be incapable of planning something as complex as escape. Plantation life trained adults to notice rebellion in strong backs and defiant stares, not in small hands carrying out chores. A child walking calmly with a rooster looked harmless, familiar, and unimportant. That perception created a blind spot large enough for freedom. In many recorded escapes, adults relied on speed, secrecy, or force. This child relied on being overlooked. His escape exposes a haunting truth: the system that stripped enslaved children of humanity also stripped itself of awareness. In underestimating him, it opened the door and never realized he had walked through it. On plantations, survival often depended not on strength or weapons, but on improvisation. Enslaved people were denied tools, resources, and mobility, forcing them to adapt using whatever objects were already part of their controlled environment. The most effective tools were often the most ordinary, items so common they drew no suspicion. Animals especially blended seamlessly into plantation life. Chickens and roosters were everywhere, in yards, near cabins, around kitchens. Their presence required no explanation. Carrying one suggested routine work: feeding, relocating, preparing for slaughter. No overseer would stop a child over something so mundane. The rooster in this escape was not just something to carry, it was functional camouflage. Its weight gave the boy a reason to move slowly. Its movement explained his posture. Most importantly, its crowing transformed sound from a liability into protection. Footsteps, rustling clothes, even hurried breathing disappeared beneath noise that already belonged to the plantation's morning soundscape. Ordinary objects also offered psychological cover. Overseers were trained to look for stolen food, weapons, or bundles, signs of intent to flee. A boy with nothing but a rooster appeared unprepared, incapable of escape. The absence of escape tools became the perfect disguise. Throughout slavery, everyday items, baskets, tools, songs, animals were quietly repurposed for resistance. What appeared harmless often carried hidden purpose. In this case, the rooster did not signal rebellion, it signaled normalcy. And normalcy was the safest disguise of all. This escape reminds us that survival under oppression often meant learning how to weaponize the ordinary. When nothing else was allowed, the enslaved turned the familiar into the unexpected, and sometimes into a path toward freedom. On a plantation, sound was constant. From before sunrise until long after dark, noise filled the air, animals calling, tools striking earth, voices giving orders, footsteps moving in familiar patterns. This constant background noise created an unintended weakness. Not all sound was examined. Only silence or something unfamiliar raised alarm. Roosters were especially important to the plantation soundscape. Their crowing marked time, not danger. It signaled morning, labor, and routine. Hearing a rooster at dawn meant nothing was wrong. It meant the day was beginning as expected. Because of this, the sound itself became invisible. For someone attempting escape, silence was risky. A single snapped twig, a hurried step, or heavy breathing could draw attention. The boy's solution was not to eliminate sound, but to hide inside it. Each crow masked his movement. Each flutter of wings explained sudden noise. What should have exposed him instead protected him. This use of sound turned surveillance against itself. Overseers relied on their ears as much as their eyes, but only to detect disruption. Familiar noise was filtered out mentally, ignored the way one ignores a ticking clock. The rooster ensured that every sound the boy made belonged to something already accepted. There is also a psychological layer to this. Sound reassures. Hearing the expected noises of morning told overseers that the system was intact. Their guard lowered not because they were careless, but because their senses were trained to trust routine. By using sound as camouflage, the boy demonstrated remarkable awareness of his environment. He understood not just what people watched, but what they stopped listening to. In a world where silence could mean death, noise became his shield, carrying him step by step beyond the plantation's reach. Plantation overseers believed their authority came from constant vigilance, but in reality, their greatest weakness was psychological blindness. Day after day, they observed the same scenes unfold in the same order. Over time, their minds stopped processing details and began relying on assumptions. They didn't truly see, they recognized patterns and trusted them. This blindness was rooted in arrogance. Overseers assumed enslaved people lacked intelligence, creativity, or the courage to outthink them. Children, especially, were dismissed as incapable of planning or deception. Because of this belief, anything that appeared ordinary was accepted without question. Their attention was trained on disruption, running bodies, raised voices, broken lines, sudden silence. Calm movement triggered no alarm. A child walking steadily across the yard with a rooster fit perfectly into their mental picture of plantation life. The brain labeled the image as normal and moved on. Psychological blindness also came from overconfidence in the system itself. Overseers trusted fences, patrols, and fear more than observation. They believed ownership equaled control. This led them to watch areas instead of people, and to count labor rather than confirm identities. The boy's escape succeeded because he never challenged their authority openly. He did not sneak or hide. He did not run. He behaved exactly as someone with no power was expected to behave. In doing so, he slipped beneath the threshold of suspicion. This moment exposes a deep irony. The same mindset that enforced slavery, dehumanization, and superiority also weakened it. By refusing to recognize the humanity and intelligence of those they enslaved, Overseers created blind spots large enough for freedom to pass through unnoticed. Most escape stories from slavery are told through moments of chaos, chases, beatings, gunfire, blood on the ground. Violence was expected, almost assumed, whenever someone tried to flee. That expectation shaped how overseers prepared themselves and where they focused their attention. And that is exactly why this escape worked. The boy did not fight. He did not resist openly. He did not break fences or overpower guards. Violence would have drawn immediate response and confirmed every fear the plantation system had trained itself to recognize. Instead, he chose the opposite path: calm, compliance, and control. By escaping without violence, he avoided triggering the plantation's alarm mechanisms, both physical and psychological. There were no raised voices, no sudden movements, no signs of rebellion. Everything appeared to function as it should. The system had no reason to react because nothing seemed wrong. This form of escape required extraordinary restraint. Fear had to be hidden. Urgency had to be disguised as patience. Every step had to look like obedience. In many ways, this was more dangerous than running. One mistake, one nervous glance, one rushed movement could have ended everything. Non-violent escape also stripped the overseers of justification. When the boy vanished, there was no incident to explain it, no fight, no witness, no obvious trail. The absence of violence created confusion rather than pursuit. Time was lost trying to understand how it happened instead of immediately reacting. This escape proves that resistance did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered. In a world built on force, the quiet refusal to play by expected rules became a powerful form of defiance, one that slipped through silence, could never pass. Most escape attempts during slavery were expected to end in chaos, shouting, gunfire, dogs, and blood on the ground. Plantation systems were designed to respond quickly to force, not subtlety. Violence was what overseers anticipated, trained for, and feared. That expectation shaped every guard's instincts, and it became their weakness. The boy chose a path that felt almost impossible. He escaped without fighting, without running, without creating a single moment of visible rebellion. There were no broken fences, no stolen weapons, no raised alarms. He moved slowly, deliberately, and calmly, appearing obedient even as he was leaving forever. This kind of escape demanded extreme self-control. Fear had to be buried. Panic could not show in his face or his body. Each step had to match what was expected of him. Violence would have revealed intention instantly, but calm behavior disguised it completely. By avoiding violence, he avoided triggering the plantation's defensive response. Overseers were conditioned to react to disruption. Since none occurred, time passed before anyone realized something was wrong. That lost time meant distance, and distance meant survival. When the boy was finally discovered missing, confusion replaced urgency. There was no obvious starting point, no crime scene, no direction to chase. Violence leaves evidence. Silence leaves questions, and questions slow pursuit. This escape challenges the idea that resistance must be loud to be powerful. In a system built on brutality, choosing nonviolence was not weakness, it was strategy. The boy did not defeat the plantation by force. He defeated it by refusing to play the role it expected, walking away so quietly that freedom arrived before anyone noticed he was gone. Many stories like this one do not survive in official documents. Plantation records were never meant to preserve the truth of enslaved lives. They were designed to track property, labor, and profit. When an enslaved child escaped, especially without violence or loss to the owner, it was often minimized, distorted, or omitted entirely. Silence in the records does not mean the event did not happen. It often means it was inconvenient. Written records from the period focus on numbers, not names. Children were frequently listed without detail or not listed at all. An escape that embarrassed overseers or exposed weakness in the system had no incentive to be documented accurately. In some cases, plantation owners avoided recording escapes to protect reputation or property value. Oral history fills these gaps. Stories passed quietly among enslaved communities preserved details that paper ignored. How someone moved, what they carried, the moment they disappeared. These accounts were shared not for fame, but for survival and hope. Each retelling kept knowledge alive, what worked, what failed, and what might one day lead another to freedom. However, oral history also changes over time. Details blur, symbols grow stronger, and ordinary objects, like a rooster, can take on deeper meaning. This does not make the story false, it reveals how memory works under trauma. What remains consistent is not every fact, but the truth of experience. The tension between oral history and written records forces us to listen differently. Absence in documents must be read as a clue, not a conclusion. In stories like this, what was not written can be just as important as what was. This escape lives in the space between paper and memory, where history was not allowed to speak freely, but found a way to survive anyway. Dawn was the most fragile moment in plantation life. It was a time of transition, when night control loosened and day order had not yet fully taken hold. Guards were tired, routines were just beginning, and attention was divided. This brief window, neither dark nor fully light, created opportunity. At dawn, movement was expected. Enslaved people stepped out of cabins, animals were released, tools were gathered, and chores began. Seeing someone walking across the yard at this hour raised no suspicion. In fact, stillness would have seemed more unusual than motion. Light itself played a role. Early morning shadows blurred details, making it difficult to judge faces, expressions, or intent. A child at a distance looked the same whether he was working or leaving. The soft light disguised urgency and masked fear. Sound also peaked at dawn. Roosters crowed, birds stirred, voices called out orders. This surge of noise overwhelmed individual sounds, allowing movement to disappear into the background. What might have been noticed later in the day was swallowed by morning chaos. Historically, many escapes occurred at night, but night carried risks, dark terrain, patrols, dogs. Dawn offered a different advantage: visibility without scrutiny. The boy understood that people were awake, but not yet fully alert. Their bodies were present, their minds lagged behind. By choosing dawn, he stepped into a moment when the plantation was briefly unguarded by habit. It was not the absence of watchers that freed him. It was the presence of routine. In that narrow slice of time, freedom was possible because the world was too busy waking up to notice someone leaving it behind. Across many cultures, the rooster has long been a symbol of transition, awakening, and survival. Its crow marks the boundary between night and day, darkness and light, danger and safety. In folklore, the rooster often appears as a guardian figure, its voice believed to chase away evil, expose hidden threats, or announce a turning point. Within enslaved communities, symbolism mattered deeply. When direct speech was dangerous, meaning traveled through stories, songs, and symbols. An ordinary animal could carry layered significance without attracting attention. The rooster, common and overlooked, became a powerful image precisely because it was safe to talk about. In some traditions, a rooster's crow signals freedom from fear, the end of night terrors, the arrival of clarity. In others, it represents cleverness and vigilance, a creature that survives by being heard, not hidden. This symbolism aligns hauntingly with the boy's escape. He did not flee into silence, but into sound, not into darkness, but into dawn. Over time, oral retellings likely elevated the rooster beyond its physical role. What may have begun as a practical choice became a symbol of intelligence overcoming brutality. The rooster came to represent not just an animal, but the idea that freedom can arrive disguised as something ordinary. Whether seen as tool, signal, or symbol, the rooster's presence transforms the story from a simple escape into folklore. It reminds us that even under extreme oppression, meaning survived, and sometimes it crowed loudly enough to mark the moment when bondage ended and possibility began.